Welcome to this explainer. So, when you hear the word economics, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Is it, complex math, stock market tickers, or maybe just really boring charts? Well, I want you to erase that image entirely. Fun fact, researchers estimate that we make thousands of choices every single day. Today, we're going to look at economics not as some dry study of money, but as the highly relatable, everyday science of those human choices. Because at its absolute core, economics is simply the study of how society and how you manage resources. It's fascinating, it applies to literally every single decision you make, and by the end of this explainer, I promise you're going to see the world just a little bit differently. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to hit 5 main stops: tackling the problem of scarcity, breaking down the science, examining the ingredients of production, answering 3 big economic questions, and finally, visualizing these choices with models. Let's just jump right in. All right, section 1, the problem of scarcity. This is it. The fundamental universal dilemma that literally kicks off all economic thought, theory, and action. To understand economics, we have to start with a pretty harsh reality, and that's scarcity. What does that mean? Well, by definition, scarcity is just the limited nature of society's resources compared to our completely unlimited human wants. Think about it for a second. As human beings, our desires are endless, right? We want better homes, faster technology, more healthcare, more entertainment. But the reality is, the resources required to actually make all these things, the materials, the labor, the time, they're strictly limited. That tension right there, that is the birthplace of economics. You can see how this works. Unlimited wants crash right into limited resources. And the result of that collision is that big red box, scarcity. And because we literally can't have everything, that red box forces us down to the yellow box, choices. We absolutely have to choose. And those choices branch out into 3 massive directions for any society. What do we produce? How do we produce it? And for whom do we produce it? But before we try to answer those, let's look at how economists actually study this whole chain of events. Moving on to section 2, breaking down the science. Because this problem of choice is just so massive, economists need different lenses to look at it. So the field is split into 2 major camps. First up, we have microeconomics. You can think of this as the zoomed-in microscope view. It focuses on the functioning of individual industries, specific firms, and households. It's all about how you, as a consumer, make choices or how one single business decides what to charge. On the flip side, we have macroeconomics. This is the wide-angle lens. It looks at the economy as one massive single entity. It examines national output, gross domestic product, and the overall growth of an entire country. But wait, there's actually another way to slice up the science, by the type of statements economists make. We've got positive economics, which is strictly about objective facts and cause and effect relationships. It just describes things exactly as they are. It's kind of like a doctor's diagnosis. Saying an increase in the money supply will lead to inflation, that's a factual claim that you can test. Conversely, we have normative economics. This one is all about value judgments, ethics, and opinions. It's prescribing what ought to be done. If someone says the government should implement policies to reduce income inequality, well, that's a normative statement. It's a subjective recommendation on how the world should work. Look at this table. It beautifully illustrates the difference between those micro and macro lenses we just talked about. Check out the prices column. In microeconomics, we care about the price of medical care, or gas, or apartment rents, specific things that hit your daily budget. But in macroeconomics, we look at the aggregate. We care about the overall consumer price index and the national rate of inflation. It's the exact same deal for employment. Micro asks how many accountants one specific firm is hiring, while macro wants to know what the total national unemployment rate is. All right, section 3, the ingredients of production. So we've talked a lot about choices in theory, but what actual physical resources do we have at our disposal to solve these economic problems? Economists group all the resources in the world into 4 vital categories, known as the factors of production. First, land, which includes basically any natural resource. Second, labor, the human effort put into the process. Third, capital. Now, in economics, capital doesn't just mean money, it actually means the machinery, the tools, and the buildings used to make other things. And finally, entrepreneurship. That's the vision and the risk-taking required to combine those first 3 factors in new, innovative ways. To get a little more specific here, those categories translate to natural resources like space, water, minerals, and even the climate. Human resources encompass your manpower, energy, talent, and professional skills. Man-made resources, that's your physical technology and equipment. But hey, we also have two other absolutely critical resources that people almost always forget about: time and information. Both of these have immense economic value. Your time is strictly limited, right? That makes it literally one of your most precious, scarce resources. Which brings us to section 4, 3 big economic questions. Because all those ingredients we just looked at are scarce, every single society on Earth has to figure out how to use them. It's a massive societal tug-of-war. So the very first big question is, what gets produced? Scarcity guarantees that we simply cannot produce all the goods and services everyone wants. No way. So a society has to prioritize. Are we building more hospitals or more highways? Are we producing more laptops or more smartphones? This decision is usually driven by how consumers value these items, basically their utility or usefulness. Visually, you can actually trace this flow. Over on the left, raw resources flow to the producers in the middle. And here is where our second question pops up. How is it produced? Producers have to figure out the optimum combination of inputs, the perfect mix of labor and capital, to use those resources as economically as possible. Finally, the output flows over to the households on the right. And that answers the third question. For whom is it produced? Who actually gets the goods? Generally speaking, it's whoever has the ability and the willingness to pay for them. Okay, our final stop, section 5, visualizing economic models. So how do economists make sense of, millions of people making these what, how, and for whom decisions every single second of the day? They use models to simplify reality, and here is one of the most foundational models out there, the circular flow diagram. It's a continuous, endless loop. Notice there are two sets of arrows here. The outer green arrows, they show the flow of dollars. Households spend money in markets, which becomes revenue for firms, who then pay wages and rent, which circles back as income for households. Now look at the inner red arrows. This is the physical flow of stuff. You, the households, actually own the factors of production, your labor, your land. You sell those to firms, firms use them to produce goods and services, and then they sell those physical goods right back to you. It's a beautifully simple way to visualize the entire economy. Now let's look at some numbers to really illustrate scarcity and choice. Imagine a totally simplified economy that only produces two things: smartphones and laptops. Because resources are fixed, producing more of one automatically means producing less of the other. Just look at the data. If you go all in on laptops, you get 10, but 0 smartphones. If you try to meet in the middle, you can have 3 smartphones, but your laptops drop to 4. You simply don't have the resources to max out both. It's a classic trade-off. So the absolutely crucial point here is that every single choice has a cost. Economists call this opportunity cost. It is simply the value of the next best alternative that you have to give up. Using those numbers we just looked at, if our economy is producing nothing but laptops and decides, hey, we want 3 smartphones, it has to drop laptop production from 10 down to 4. Therefore, the opportunity cost of those 3 smartphones is the 6 laptops that never got made. You just can't have both. And we can actually graph this exact concept. This is called the Production Possibilities Frontier, or the PPF. In this example, it's plotting computers versus cars. That blue line represents the absolute maximum possible output given our current resources. Points exactly on the line like A and B are efficient. We are squeezing every last drop of potential out of what we have. But look at point D, sitting inside the curve. That represents an inefficient outcome. If we're at point D, maybe there's widespread unemployment or a recession going on. We have the resources, but we aren't using them. But here's the good news. That frontier isn't stuck forever. What happens if we discover some amazing new technology or our workforce becomes highly educated? We get economic growth. On the graph, this causes the entire curve to shift outward, from the blue line to the red line. Suddenly, combinations of goods that were completely impossible before are now totally within our reach. This outward shift is exactly why this model matters so much. It is literally the visual story of human progress and rising living standards. It's honestly amazing how much one single curved line can teach us. The PPF model visually summarizes the entire core of economics. It shows us scarcity because we can't produce anywhere beyond the line. It shows us choice because we have to pick a specific spot on the line. It shows opportunity cost because moving along that curve means trading one good for another. And as we just saw, it perfectly illustrates both economic growth and unemployment. To bring this whole explainer full circle, let's reflect on the core principles that govern how people make all these decisions. Principles 1 through 4 reveal a pretty simple truth. You face trade-offs, your choices have costs, and you respond to incentives. When you zoom out, principles 5 through 10 cover how we interact in markets and how the whole macroeconomy actually functions. But it all starts with that very first foundational rule: people face trade-offs. Which ultimately brings us right back to you. See, economics isn't just about factories or global markets or national inflation rates. It is the science of your daily life. You possess incredibly valuable, intensely scarce resources: your time, your energy, and your attention. You face trade-offs every single day, and every choice you make has an opportunity cost. So I'll leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Knowing for a fact that you can't have it all, how will you choose to allocate your own scarce resources today? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep thinking like an economist.